Всем привет! Это бонусный эпизод для первого выпуска нашего подкаста «Погоди, Вилли», где мы обсуждаем фильмографию кантри-квартета The Highwaymen. В первом выпуске мы с Георгием обсуждали «Дилижанс» 86 года и оригинальную картину 39-го под режиссурой Джона Форда. А для этого бонусного выпуска я пригласил своего американского знакомого Дэна, с которым мы поговорили о фильмографии Джона Форда, о влиянии «Дилижанса» на американскую культуру, о вестернах, Джонни Уэйне и о многих других вещах. Выпуск полностью на английском языке. Если вас не смущает пространное рассуждение и мой ужасный акцент, милости прошу. Также у Дэна на YouTube есть замечательный подкаст о номине, через который мы с ним и познакомились. Ссылка на него будет в описании. Приятного прослушивания!
Here we go.
I'm just gonna pump up the volume a bit.
Pump up the volume, pump up the volume. I just went over to the gas station to get coffee. The lady behind the counter, I get coffee there a lot, so she sort of knows me. She's like, "This was supposed to be my day off. I wasn't supposed to work today.
I wasn't even supposed to be here today."
And I said that, and she just kind of looked at me weird because I'm just in there buying coffee, and I realized this is the only gas station employee in America who has never heard of Clerks.
Did she ever a dead guy with an erection in a toilet?
I mean, if she did, it was sometime during the Carter administration. It's a little sad seeing older and older people working at the gas station these days, but, you know, she's a sweetheart.
So yeah, why don't we sort of segue into the intro to the podcast itself?
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to do a short introductory bit for our non-existent audience. So hi, non-existent audience. This is a sort of a bonus episode, sort of the addendum to an podcast that I already recorded and published at some platforms. And the podcast is titled Not Yet Willie. And the idea is that me and my bud, the Russian bud, we sort of like the country supergroup, the Highwaymen. Yes, this is what they self-identified as a country supergroup.
I like how you're phrasing it like it was a gender. I identify as a straight man. They identify as the Highwayman.
The Highwayman is a very dubious gender identification, you know.
Why don't we do it in the road?
The four of these guys actually had quite an extensive filmography. Some were in more films, some were in lesser amount of films, and the point is, only one of them, Willie Nельсон, is still left alive. So we're going to be recording a podcast until the last one of the Highwaymen dies. So not yet, Willie. Hold on a little longer.
No, out of the four of them, he's the only one left living. I looked them up last night, and they were a lot closer in age than I thought they were. Like, I really thought Kристофферсон was a lot younger than Johnny Cash was.
You'd think so, right?
You'd think.
It's almost like he always had this image of a younger fellow, sort of kicked around by the older Johnny Cash character. Like, yeah, your boy and your younger shit is not that interesting to me. I'm an older person, but they were like a couple of years difference.
Yeah, it's like in The Graduate how Dustin Hoffman was closer in age to Anne Bancroft. Well, no, because he's 29. Anne Bancroft was like 35. Anne Bancroft, Mrs. Robinson, is the age I am now.
It's sad because she's younger than I am now.
And she looked a hell of a lot better at 35 than I do right now. Thank God this is an audio podcast.
You'd have to trust us on that, okay?
Yeah, I mean, if your name is Mrs. Robinson and you want to seduce me, just like I have paper bags, we can put them over your head before we get to this.
We did the first episode on Stagecoach, the 1986 film, which is a remake of Stagecoach directed by John Ford, which came out in 1939, a classic of Hollywood cinema. And we did that because all four of the Highwaymen were in that movie, so they were cast as different characters. But before we talk about the synopsis, I would like to ask you, Dan, since I have no idea about Stagecoach and its cultural relevance in the US. Can you tell me a little more about what kind of a movie is this and who was John Ford in general, like for American public, for American eye? Like who was that guy?
Yeah, so John Ford, he starts out in the silent cinema. He's one of those guys they kind of just dragged off the studio lot, and then the next thing you know, he directed like 15 movies in a year, and most of them are lost. Like Frank Capra's career kind of started like that too. And by the time the 30s roll around, John Ford, I forget what the first like big John Ford movie was where he like really gets into the cultural. It might have been Stagecoach, because Stagecoach is definitely, that's one of the earliest, if not the earliest Ford movie that you see in a lot of those movie canon books. Like 1001 movies you must see before you die. There's a copy of that in a lot of people's houses. Stagecoach is in there. I don't think Judge Priest is in there.
It must be in some kind of national registry or something for Congress.
Oh, it's totally on the National Film Registry, no question. Ford is what everyone chose to remember of the era of Western movies. You know, there's a few Howard Hawks movies people still talk about. But to kind of give some context, in like the 40s, 50s, even up to like the mid 60s in the United States, Westerns were more popular here than like superhero movies are now. The longest running TV show in the United States for a really long time was Gunsmoke. There's a few guys who were directing Westerns who could make a pretty good Western. There were also an absurd number of just god-awful, unwatchable, forgotten Westerns, most of them featuring Gene Autry in some capacity. And you just kind of watching on Turner Classic Movies, waiting for some like footage of like a circus or a rodeo or something. That's like the one redeeming quality. And so John Ford, I think because he starts out in silent movies, he's a lot better at doing two things than almost anybody else making talkies in the 30s. And those two things are really long establishing shots. You know, every time he's shooting a picture of the desert, it kind of reminds me of like George Harriman's Crazy Cat, with this kind of dreamlike, shifting, kind of disorienting set of hills and stuff, and reaction shots. I mean, up until maybe Cassavetes or something, he is the absolute master of reaction shots in American cinema.
What would you define as the master of reaction shots? I mean, the reaction shot, as far as I see it, it's like pretty simple, like shot, reaction shot, reaction shot. Like, what's so difficult about that? What makes him so distinct?
Well, he's willing to let the actors act. So, like in Stagecoach, you can see a lot of this. There's points in the movie where it kind of looks like there was dialogue written and he just cut it and replaced it with kind of very subtle moving facial features, right? Or like you'll have a few lines of dialogue, the person leaves the room, just like John Renoir. He doesn't just cut when the person leaves the room. He lets the guy, you know, shrug by himself in the room for a second or two. That is unheard of in pretty much any other 30s U.S. movie.
Because the film was so expensive. You didn't have much time to waste.
It's partially that, and I think it's partially like there's not really a clearly distinguished line between theater and movies at that point, right? Like a lot of early 30s U.S. movies, it looks kind of like a stage play because they got this heavy sound recording equipment. They can't really move around that much.
They have to shout like idiots.
And everybody just wants everything to be talk. Like, you know, most of those like James Cagney, like those early gangster movies, it's like, medium shot, we're in a room, we're talking. Another medium shot, we're in a room, we're talking. You know, or like M. It's all talky, and then the parts that are silent, it's literally just shot straight up like a silent movie. Ford kind of understands a bit better. He was ahead of the curve on where the silence belongs in a talkie.
It's still quite exposition heavy, like by modern standards. I mean, I've seen it twice or thrice by this point, but the first time I saw it just a couple of months ago or so, or something like this. My, impressions were pretty fresh. I never had this. I was aware of its cultural significance, but I never actually experienced it, never watched it. And I still find it a bit, there's a certain point in movie history, in American movie history, where I see it sort of shifts towards more something more interesting about the exposition. And I think this is like somewhere along Citizen Kane, like 1941. So like a couple of years after that.
Yeah, and Wells claimed that he watched this movie like 35 times, which I could believe.
So I still see it. Stagecoach is like that, closer to that than most of the like early talkie stuff. So it's okay. It's I can watch this pretty easily, even from 2024. Some of the longer shots I didn't like. You mentioned the mesmerizing location shots of deserts and such things like curvy roads and stuff. Yeah, I was interested in that too. But for my money, I think there's some of these shots held on for a little too long, maybe a little too Lynchian long,
Like, see, I'm like a big fan of James Benning, so like his movies, it's literally just 10-minute landscape shot, and then it's all edging and no ejaculating, and
Fair enough.
You might just not be kinky enough for Stagecoach.
Well, there was a shot where the Stagecoach was riding along this curvy road, and it was riding in the distance, and soldiers, like troops, were following it. And all I was thinking at this point was like, where is the background matte painting? That they were supposed to hit the matte painting at some point. Like, where is that point? I'm pretty sure that the 1939 landscape didn't look exactly like this. I'm not sure if they actually did film that on the location.
They did shoot that. Like, it was a big deal that Ford would shoot on location, and I want to say he was shooting in like Arizona or something. You can tell there's like 3 places they shot most of those Western movies for at least like 15, 20 years. The John Ford looking stuff, I mean, there are parts of California that look like that, where it's just like straight up desert. I want to say this one was Arizona. The ones where it looks really cheap and kind of fake looking, a lot of those were shot in like basically the Meadowlands in New Jersey when the weather was right. Because you can get a lot of mileage with black and white, right? Because one of my favorite things about Ford is that kind of dreamy, hazy gradient that he always gets out of the sky, right? And that was the first thing I noticed when I started watching the 86 one was color in high definition does not help this at all. This just looks very cheap and tawdry the closer I can look at it, right?
Yeah, the framing is okay, but it doesn't utilize the framing. The picture itself is like very bland. I mean, everyone seems to be standing right where they're supposed to be standing, acting the way they're supposed to be, but...
Yeah, they're cribbing shots directly from Ford. They just don't understand what makes the Ford shots work. Composition is only one element of making a picture.
Yeah, lighting is the key, I think. Like, is the most important one. But the lighting looks very flat in 1986 in comparison to the black and white one.
Like, you ever see My Darling Clementine?
I've heard of it.
That might be my favorite John Ford movie because it's just all people sitting on porches and weird skyscape stuff. Another weird thing about John Ford is he's kind of making like hangout movies. He's not really like most of these Westerns are like obsessively focused on cowboys, Indians. When does the confrontation happen? Or I don't know. When's the guy going to rob the train? When's the guy going to rob this? And Ford will take his sweet, sweet time to do almost anything in his movies. Like, and you can see that especially in the non-Western ones, like Long Voyage Home. It's literally just 5 guys getting drunk for a night. It's like almost a Eugene O'Neill play or something, right? And there's not a lot of movies like that coming out in the early 1940s,
There's not a lot of movies like that coming out now. So
yeah, I mean, and there were people that like Rio Bravo, right? It is kind of a hangout movie. Rio Bravo, it's 80% of that movie, you're just sitting in the jail with Dean Martin or whatever, right? And I think that's why it feels more modern, I think, because I can tell apart a John Ford movie. I think most of the other guys that were directing Westerns in the 30s, if you put a few, I don't know, he showed me 5 minutes of 10 movies, I could tell you the John Ford movie, and the rest of them I could just say probably the guy's dad.
That's a very common quality among all of them.
Yeah.
But Ford's interesting in the sense that he actually, took his time to show all of these characters their origin story. And basically it had this not only road movie feel, but also this very weird quality of a movie. These early, what do you call them? Superhero movies where they cram all the superheroes together in one film, like A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And you have this wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
wonderful movie.
They call them gangbang films.
So they gather all sorts of different characters with different motifs and different personalities together in one literal stagecoach and try to sort of untangle this bunch of stories right at the end. And I'm not sure how well he did with that. I mean, it's sort of resolved itself by the end. So the main overarching plot is the Ringo Kid guy, the John Wayne character, and he has his revenge for his brother murdered, and he goes into the sunset, rides into the sunset with the prostitute lady Dallas, right? The rest of it, some subplots are, I think, more developed. Some are really underdeveloped. Especially, I was confused by the whiskey drummer fellow, how the scene with the arrow to the chest that he got is it's so weird. It sort of seemed like one of those cinematic cliches of 2 days before retirement speeches, He was like,
right.
Well, it seems to be a very good trip we had so far. And everybody's like, yep. And he immediately gets an arrow to the chest right after that.
I think it's a hard movie to evaluate because it's in that weird space of these cliches have not all been established yet. I'm sure there are things that were cliches at that point in this movie, but it's hard to tell what's what because Kurosawa was watching this movie, Wells was watching this movie, Tarkovsky probably thought about this movie at some point when he was making Stalker. I remember there were parts of it where it would get really slow, and I was like, this is like Stalker if the people ever shut up,
So it's much better in that regard.
Well, at least he chose between the color, the black and white, right? No, I like Stalker, but it's...
I really don't.
I mean, it's not my favorite Tarkovsky movie, but anything that'll show garbage for that long with nasty looking water over it, kind of I feel a kinship to. I mean, and Jean Renoir, I kept thinking about Jean Renoir, right? Because this is same year as Rules of the Game. I presume you've seen Rules of the Game at some point.
Again, I've heard of it.
Wait, you never?
And I have a book on Renoir, but I haven't seen it yet.
Rules of the Game. Here's your homework.
Were you sitting on it the whole time?
No. I have it face out right next to me right now, next to Amarcord and the Brack anthology.
For the benefit of the audience, Dan just pulled a DVD of the Renoir film right out of his ass. I don't know. It looked like that.
That's the fun of shooting in my library. But it does remind me of that in that there's not really a star. I think John Wayne de facto becomes the star in this movie just because he's the only one who has charisma.
He has a dolly zoom, the proto dolly zoom for his introduction.
Well, just compared to every other, because everybody else kind of looks like they came out of vaudeville.
Mm-hmm.
John Wayne seems like he is a person for the movies. He seems like the only person who's kind of completely both feet in the movies. mentally, yeah, like it has to end on him, but he's not really the star of the movie. Like, he doesn't get that much screen time relative to everybody else. It's not like everybody else's storyline is revolving around the Ringo kid. It's just that once you get the camera on him, you realize, like, what's his name? That I could barely understand anything the guy was saying, but the banker or whatever, where he's got the case and he. Like, that was a very popular style of acting in vaudeville, on stage. You can kind of see that, like Jimmy Durante. You can see bits of that when, like, Jerry Lewis will do, like, kind of more over-the-top characters.
Did you see the guy who was cast as a banker in the 1986 version?
I did not get that far, because...
so it was like 5 minutes in.
All right, then I did not get very far. Or I think I saw him, but it just wasn't.
He looks like a guy from Santa Barbara or some TV soap or something, like the regular, like evil banker dude. He looks like someone who would be playing in a TV soap that would be in the background of a Lynch show, a David Lynch show.
Probably.
Like Invitation to Love, like something like that. He would be there.
Because that wasn't... The 86 one it's a TV movie. That's how they blew their budget on the Highwaymen. The rest of that, I think the biggest takeaway that I took after apparently watching less than 10 minutes of the movie right after watching the original and then falling asleep next to my cat.
Having fever dreams.
My cat's very fuzzy. That was a big takeaway. But also, I think color is what killed the Western. Like, there are great color Westerns, there's The Searchers. There's way more good black and white Westerns than there are color ones. But yeah, you put all of that in color. Like John Ford, it's the mythical West. The characters can kind of take on this larger symbolic significance that's not, they seem more archetypal than they seem like fully fleshed out like real humans. And I think that kind of reminded me of Stalker too, where it's like, this guy's the doctor, this guy's the guy with the gun, this guy's the... And yeah, when you put it in color, the town just looks like... I mean, this probably is not a popular thing in Russia. In the United States, it was really popular for a few decades to have these, like, fake frontier towns that kind of look just like a shitty version of... or a shittier version of the set in the 86 Stagecoach. And so every time they cut to the outside, I'm just like, oh, I remember, yeah, like my parents and we're eating hot dogs or whatever, right? And that's mentally where I am looking at that. The only color Western I can think of from like the last 40 years or so, let's say after John Ford dies, that actually successfully does that is Deadwood. And that's because Deadwood, like, there was a lot of attention paid to making that set look as dirty and nasty as possible. Like,
for me, the sets look kind of like something out of Star Trek. The where Captain Kirk gets transported to Wild West.
What wasn't there a Western episode of Star Trek? There's the one where they end up on the fucking gangster planet.
I think there was something about kids being violent.
Oh, yeah, it's first season, yeah.
It also kind of reminded me of this weird-ass comedy episode of The Prisoner.
Oh, yeah, the one where he does, the fake Western episode of The Prisoner. Because the thing is, like, in United States cinema, it's sort of how big Stagecoach would have been is kind of hard to translate now. Like, Westerns were big enough where pretty much any American director you can think of that was working before maybe like 1990 or so probably saw this movie 5 to 10 times. It's one of the few movies that probably would have been played in like repertory screenings, which was that's kind of what determined the canon before there was home video and people could kind of look at everything. You're waiting for the thing to show up at the movie theater. If it never shows up at the movie theater, it's like it never existed,
So, how big of a star vehicle was that for John Wayne?
I mean, I was, obviously I wasn't there at the time. I'm not quite that old. I think, John Wayne, he starts out as this B actor. He kind of has the charisma of a B actor. I could see him being in a really bad sci-fi movie, right?
We have John Carradine for that in that movie, so
right.
We got this covered already.
Yeah, and so John Wayne, I would guess this was the movie that kind of I think he was a known commodity to some extent before then. Pretty sure Stagecoach is the movie that makes John Wayne the John Wayne that everybody remembers. You can tell, it's the man is a movie star. He has that it quality as soon as he shows up on screen.
Again, the zoom on him, the camera zooms on him just to show that he's the guy. He's our guy. He sweats very cinematically. Lighting shows that pretty well. The color of his skin, the lighting on his skin is very contrasting. It looks very cinematic. The guy looks great on camera.
He's the only person in the movie almost that understands that because movie theater screens used to be bigger than they are now. In a lot of places, you would have this, a lot of times the movie theater would be called the Palace or something they look in those movies or whatever, it doesn't look like a standard modern movie theater. And I think John Wayne is the only person in this cast who intuitively understands that I can underact because my head is going to be 20 feet tall.
Oh, yes.
Right? Everybody else is still kind of yelling the back of the audience isn't going to hear them.
Clearly shown in the scene with the prostitute lady where they deliver a baby from this Mrs. Mallory or whatever. And they have a moment when they talk about the ranch that he has, and he probably would like the lady to come along with him. And this is uncharacteristically a silent moment where John Wayne actually, does a lot of the acting done by, his gestures, his movements of the head, and some really, really short and concise phrasing yeah, we have a ranch, there's water, it would be good to live for a man and for a lady too. And you sort of understand everything without the unnecessary wordy exposition, which was the whole movie before that was very wordy in a lot of ways, but this scene was something entirely different.
And I think Ford, halfway through the movie, because I know a lot more about Ford's later career, but I remember, I think it was Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Basically, they handed him a script, and the guy who wrote the script said, this is a great movie, but I don't know who wrote the movie, right? John Ford was not shy about editing the scripts that he was getting. And it makes sense because I think that the more we know about these characters, the less this movie works. There's points in the movie where the guy that I kind of studied under, John Jost, one of my favorite things about his movies, I think just because it's a quirk of him personally, I don't know that it's something I would say put this in your movie. He'll have dialogue scenes. He has so little interest in the dialogue. The people just keep talking and the camera shifts over to the window because he's more interested in whatever's in the window than these two people talking.
Just shut up, shut up.
There's at least two of those in Stagecoach where it's just John Ford, he's just using that excess dialogue as set dressing, and the real shit's happening with the people looking at each other who aren't talking, right? And I think that's one of the most modern elements of the film. I have very little memory of seeing anything quite like that in another movie from the United States before 1938. Their Rules of the Game has a lot of shots like that, but that's not the United States.
That's Renoir.
That's Renoir.
I also loved it was kind of quaint, but the river crossing scene, when they realized that the ferry has been burned down, it was destroyed, so they had to cross the river like in this video game, the Oregon Trail, literally cross the river. And I loved that they actually placed the cameraman on the stagecoach to film that. It was very wonkily, shoddily, very shakily done, but I did like the overall bravery of a director, his self-assurance that this might work. We will show this action cam.
That's totally a silent movie move. Right, because silent movies, you can have these crazy moving shots because the cameras really weren't that heavy, right? Like that's part of why Buster Keaton didn't do well in talkies, is because like Buster Keaton in a silent movie, you know, you can just take that camera, put it anywhere, like, oh, okay, we're gonna drop a boulder, whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Ford, he's not shy about doing that because he made like, you know, 40 silent movies before he was like 25 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe part of it has to do with how acting changed, because you have to kind of remember this is before method acting existed. Like, method acting wasn't even really a concept when this movie came out, so, like, the talking is what reminds me this is 1938. The rest of it, it's like...
Could be anywhere. Like,
you know, if there was, like, a John Ford Instagram filter where I could just take a picture from my porch and it has that weird sky gradient, like, I would love that.
Incidentally, when you mentioned Buster Keaton, there was quite an impressive stunt, which... shouldn't be surprising. It was the 30s where the stuntman lives and health were not in high regard, but the Geronimo battle scene.
Oh, yeah, the guy who falls off the horse and then the horses keep going and the tracking shot keeps on.
Yes.
Yeah, that is impressive. Don't know how they did that.
I'm not even sure if the guy was alive after that shot.
Well, and they had the guy standing in for John Wayne who was like jumping between the horses while they're moving, which is, you know, I mean, it's sort of like Keaton jumping on the moving motorcycle or whatever, standing on it. Goddamn. But also, like, it's so obviously a stunt double because they have this guy's hat pulled over to where, like I don't know how he can see anything.
What else are you going to do, right?
That's the movies. That's the magic of the movies.
The magic of the movies, yeah. This scene in general was a little, maybe kind of too long for me. That's because they actually reused some of the shots several times over just to, you know, make the battle more epic. But overall, technically really impressive as an example of a stunt work. But it's all right.
Yeah, nobody's watching a John Ford movie for the action sequences. At least not in 2024.
Well, I realize that now.
Like the guy who had the really good action. I mean, Howard Hawks had better action sequences in his screwball comedies, I think, than in the Western movies.
You know what's been funny? The scene prior to the, prior to the river crossing scene or something, when the Stagecoach was traveling in the distance, so we see that traveling the road across the mountains, and then the camera swiftly pans over to the Native Americans, the Geronimo, standing on the hill, looking at them, and it cuts to the next shot when we see again the same Stagecoach, and it pans over again like 2 times in a row, one scene after the other. It had that sitcom quality, you know, like. Right? And it's also underlined by the music, which is one of the aspects that I really didn't like. I don't know. I looked it up, and it says this movie had like 7 composers.
That was pretty normal for that point in time. Yeah, because like he would have been under studio contract, right? So it's not like making a movie now where it's like I find a producer, then I have to like eat lunch with a bunch of people to convince them to do this thing, and then we got to do this, and then we got to do that. Like, you work for the studio has certain resources and assets. The advantage is way less pre-production time. The disadvantage being that
less control.
Yeah, like
the incidental music was sort of like, you know, something out of a cartoon. Some Tom. It had this Tom and Jerry quality, especially the earlier scenes in the first town they were traveling out of. Tanto, when the doctor guy comes into the bar to have the last drink, the music is like so whimsical. It's so weird.
Oh yeah. Well, that's intentional. I mean, I can't read John Ford's mind, but like the lovable drunk who proves himself trope, that was a huge trope in both vaudeville, early US animation. It's kind of weird that the doctor confused me, I think, more than any other character in this movie, because John Ford probably made the best movie I've ever seen about alcoholism, like 3 years after this, that has the exact opposite message of every depiction of alcohol.
He realized his mistakes by that point.
I guess I mean, in like the long voyage home, if you never saw that, worth it just to see John Wayne try to do a Swedish accent. Yeah, John Wayne, and he's supposed to be a Swedish sailor.
Oh.
And he talks like he's from Sweden. And honestly, John Wayne does it worse than I just did it, right?
He has a lot of moves.
And this is a good enough movie where that does not sink the whole movie.
Great.
Right?
Is it better or worse than Shatner's Esperanto in Incubus?
I never saw Incubus, but I mean, William Shatner's voice captivates me, so...
His delivery is captivating.
Space.
Delivery of anything in general.
The final... Yeah, that man could read me the phone book and I would swoon, like I'm that kind of weeb.
I like to torture people with his Bohemian Rhapsody. It's brilliant.
I love that. I've instructed multiple people to play that on loop at my funeral, the music video.
It's great. I love it.
But yeah, John Wayne's Swedish accent is fucking terrible. But yeah, it's just these like sailors, they go out, they drink way too much, their life goes on. Think like Stagecoach, but there's no action sequence at the end. It's just this character study in a bar. Very Eugene O'Neill. Probably, I mean, I think Long Day's Journey into Night would have gotten like some kind of award at pretty close to when that was made, so it's probably an influence. But
when you mentioned the Swedish accent, I was reminded of this skit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail in the very beginning when they changed the subtitles from Sweden and all, and that brought me back to the Stagecoach, where at the very beginning when they have a scene with Doctor. Somewhere around that time, they also show this lady, Dallas, that was chased out of the town by some sort of crooning committee, like some ladies of high moral qualities or something. They looked...
Oh, yeah, that is actually historically accurate, yeah. So
was it a thing?
Evangelicals in this country are not a new thing at all. I mean, I don't think they're a new thing in any country. It just looks different over time. The most popular genre of literature in the United States for a solid, until 1900 or so, if you didn't live in a big city, there was no bookstore. The only books you're going to have access to are maybe like a Bible. And there were these books they would sell door to door called like character manuals or whatever. And it's just like a big hardcover book about how boys are supposed to become men and behave or whatever. And those were really popular. They'd sell them door to door and you get them in the mail. But that's all the books you'd have access to, except like the what were called temperance novels. So temperance novels were huge. Like you go through I go through collections of 19th century books every once in a while. They're everywhere. No one remembers any of them. Your standard temperance novel is kind of just like, young girl is a nice girl. Young girl finds the wrong crowd. Young girl, it's like the original Grimm's fairy tales. It always ends with like...
morality tale or something.
Yeah, like if double-ended dildos existed back then, like you'd have the end of, like Requiem for a Dream is basically a temperance novel on film, right?
Wait, was there a double-ended dildo in Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah, Jennifer Connelly when she goes to try to get the heroin from I think it's Michael Duncan Clark, and he's just like, all right, ladies, use the dildo.
I have to take your word for it.
Ass to ass. That was like, I remember that because that was the first time I ever heard the expression ass to ass as a child. The temperance novels and stuff, you would have these groups of ladies where they would just be like, all they have to do all day is just be like, f*** everybody else for having sex and drinking or whatever, and that's all they would do, and they would, they'd be like the passive-aggressive version of a lynch mob.
Yeah.
And they tried chasing the prostitutes or whatever out of town. And the funny thing is, like, if the town burned down and you kind of, like, I don't know if you noticed this in the movie, but people are just, like, leaving lit cigars on top of wooden tables constantly, right? Like, a lot of those places burned down. When those this is what happened to Seattle. When Seattle had, like, the big earthquake, the only person in the town who had enough cash saved up to rebuild the town was the madam at the whorehouse. So they would kind of end up being the bank sometimes if shit really hit the fan. But yeah, that part with the like old ladies chasing the prostitute out.
I mean, it looked like a Monty Python skit.
That's what they're making fun, right? Like, this movie's hard to watch because it has been digested into so many other things that I've already seen. So it's hard to tell, like, what started here, what didn't start here, you know, right?
I get the intention of the of Ford, maybe, that he was actually supposed to mock them, not that openly, but he did show them in negative light as this crowd of old ladies just walking, like soldiers in feet to feet in rhythm, and just chasing the poor lady out. And I got the whole subplot of her, which I think, I don't know about morality tales, but I was clearly reminded of French novel, the Guy de Maupassant. What's the title in English? I'm gonna find it in just a second. About a prostitute who was also traveling on by stagecoach somewhere in Europe, and I think she was the only one who helped them out, but they actually betrayed her in the end. Something like this. Let me just find the title of the novel. Just a sec. Boule de Suif. Boule de Suif. I'm not sure if you know that.
I never read that. I thought you were talking about Pygmalion, but
it's also known as dumpling, butterball, ball of fat, ball of lard, small ball. Well, the writer is Guy de Maupassant. It's one of the most famous works of his. It was incredibly huge here. So it was sort of like this tale about a prostitute with a heart of gold who was helping people out, but they actually still rejected her as a member of the society. So that was the point. People are assholes was the point. And I could clearly see that in the Stagecoach, because they were actually all trying to keep some distance from the lady, and it's not even clear why. Like,
that's pretty common, I think, because like there's the one guy who's like, I'm an important businessman, and then he gets arrested at the end, and the prostitute gets redeemed. And I think that's very intentional on Ford's part. The Ringo kid, he's also kind of outside of the society, trying to redeem himself in some way. And we notice that like the outlaw characters, I mean, honestly, I think like the Ringo kid and Dallas are kind of presented as more legitimate people than the supposed legitimate people in the society. And I think that was a really popular theme, especially in the United States at that point.
So sort of like a redemption arc, you mean?
Yeah. Well, the feeling that like there was an authenticity that came from being outside of society, and that the rules of the society were open to question, in a subtle way in this movie. You also figure the Depression's going on, right? So you have massive influx of immigrants who kind of feel like they're outside the society until they're kind of figure out how to assimilate. And you have a bunch of people who probably were forced to do things they really did not want to do because of the Depression, kind of feeling down on themselves. So this whole narrative of like the outlaw is authentic and the person who follows the rules of society is not, is going to play really well. I mean, it still plays really well. Like, that's a huge trope in hip hop, right? Like, if you're a like guy who went to college and got a nice job and did everything right, that's not a positive thing in hip hop culture. The same way that it's at least in a John Ford Western, it's not going to be in it. The whole mythology of the Western, I think, is about, society is this blank slate. The West is this empty canvas, and like that's in Ford movies I noticed that a lot. Like, it looks, the lack of detail in the desert adds a lot to that dreamlike nature. Like, you just have this outline, maybe there's a cactus somewhere. It's a very minimal landscape relative to like, shooting in a city or shooting in any kind of modern landscape. And the person goes out into the world and then proves themselves.
So what you're saying is they are sort of depicted as society's rejects who either blend in or sort of like bend the rules so that can live comfortably with it without compromising their principles or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a lot of distrust. There was a lot of justified distrust of banks because there had just been a giant financial crash like 6 years before this movie came
You know,
out.
by today's standards, I was incredibly surprised that they didn't actually cast a stereotypical Jew character as a banker.
Right? Like, and that does happen in some of those movies. Well, America's never been quite as fixated on Jews as the rest of the world. I feel like. But yeah, so there's this distrust of the bankers for obvious reasons. There's this distrust of, because I'm sure there's a lot of people where they did everything right in the 20s and then the economy collapses. And it's like, oh, okay, I did all this for nothing. Society's this big ruse or whatever. And like a lot of the popular folk songs from that period, like John Wesley Harding, I know it through cover versions. I'm trying to remember, probably the Carter family would have sung it back then. And it's just this song about this guy who robs trains and then gives the money to the poor. There's a lot of Robin Hood stories in those like 30s Depression era folk songs because that was a really appealing narrative to people.
The whole time I was thinking about the fact that in Soviet cinema, there was a clear lack of several genres that were incredibly popular in the, obviously in the US, but also in the Western, Eastern Europe, like Westerns. And horrors are another example, but Westerns were mostly either imported and sometimes heavily censored. And there were one or two examples of Westerns of movies in the Soviet cinema that could actually be considered Westerns. And the only example I can think of now is, I think it was made in the 70s. It's called The White Sun of the Desert. And the peculiar thing about this is that when you were talking about this immigrants analogy and all that, the character, the main hero there, is sort of a military guy who represents the Red Army, the Soviet army, who goes on to quest to save some women in the deserts of some vaguely Middle Eastern country where basically a terrorist group sort of controls, and he has to, get those women back from him and liberate them and probably kill the bad guy in the process, right? What I think is peculiar here is that while Westerns, the American Westerns, are all dealing with characters who have to bend the society they live in, this guy actually, he's the outsider from the get-go. So he represents another society and he sort of infiltrates the traditional society of another country. That's what makes I think the approaches to filmmaking, to filming such genre tropes as the outsider different in the US and the Soviet cinema. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the landscape is a lot different, and also, like, the history is a lot different. So, like, American literature, American cinema is obsessed with the fact that, like, the United States is a cobbled together concept. The United States does not exist before 200. It's not like there's some huge legacy of the United States relative to most other countries. It's a fairly new thing, right? So, and also they get to this kind of big blank canvas. Obviously, there's the genocide of the Native Americans, but in the popular imagination, that looks like a blank canvas to them. Richard Poirier wrote a really good book about this called A Place Elsewhere, I think was the name of it. But there's just a lot of, like, Huck Finn. He's going down the river. He meets these abstract representations of what the American identity could be. Similar to Stagecoach, yeah, like it ends up being the people outside of the society are actually the good ones, and they kind of reach some kind of peace with the larger society. On the road, you could look at a lot of U.S. Westerns as sort of these allegories about how is law established in a society? How does the society, through its actions, establish what its character is going to be? I think that the strangest thing about The Searchers is that it doesn't really touch on a lot of that. I think The Searchers is like very unusual as Westerns go because it is kind of already dealing with an established society. And you can almost say The Searchers is like the first revisionist Western, but that's a stretch. Yeah, like there's just a lot of that. And also, like in the United States, it's very ethnically diverse. some people are kind of drawing their identity from their ethnic identity, but there's maybe before 10 years ago, it was sort of like, okay, you're supposed to find your own identity.
Theoretical melting pot.
Yeah, like I become an American, not like I'm carrying on Jewish tradition or something like that. And the sheriff going into the town.
Now I'm sheriff in this town. Yeah, it's a peculiar thing. Yeah, the traveling law figure that who was a representative of law in one town, then he sort of moved, and there's law in another town represented by him. It's a peculiar thing, both conceptually and the way it's depicted in the film. Like, it's quaint. I sort of like that. It's
when does this stop being a camping trip and become a society? Right, that's the question most Westerns are asking. And,
like, can we still kill the guy without any repercussions? Or maybe we could think like 5 minutes before doing that. It's like this Plummet Brothers dilemma, right? Those guys who had absolutely no reason to, frame Ringo Kid to, be assholes or to even pursue the conflict further in the end of the Stagecoach. The main plumber guy, the villain in this movie, he looked like he didn't really want to be there. He had this face of, this weird delivery of a guy who's sort of like, what am I doing here?
Well, because he's a MacGuffin, right? He's just a reason to get John Wayne to that town. And I mean, to some extent, it may be like he doesn't really want to go through with it, but he lives in this tiny town, and if he doesn't defend his honor or whatever, he's not talking to his buddies on the internet. There's very real kind of social shunning repercussions if you don't follow the weird whatever rules of the time because you're living in a town of 100 people or whatever. Like,
I don't know, man. I thought if telegraph doesn't work, like, nobody knows anything from the outside world, so just travel to the next town and you're free to go, you're safe.
Yeah, and I mean that was kind of like the wide open expanse. That's supposed to be like America is the place where you come and you become this new person. Like, you can reinvent yourself like the Ringo Kid or whatever. And, of course, people are going to be people. And at a certain point, you build enough mega cities, that story gets kind of long in the tooth. Like, it still has a pretty big grip on the American imagination. Like, if you start implying to people in conversation, because, like, personally, I'm a bit more of a determinist, I think, than I would say. I believe in the myth of American self-invention. But yeah, if you talk to people in conversation in terms of, like, there are clear limits to who they can be and what their identity is, they will throw a shit fit to this day. It's like the idea of self-definition is very much baked into the American identity, for better or for worse, in a way that I just don't get the sense of in a lot of like international literature, cinema.
Oh yeah, in Europe and in Eastern Europe, the ability to conceal the true identity was the key for survival. In most cases, like the face behind the mask and the mask behind the mask behind the mask behind the mask, like multiple layers of postmodern rejection of self, is probably the only way to exist here more or less comfortably.
Well, in The Great Gatsby, kind of like, what is the plot of The Great Gatsby? The Great Gatsby, he's this guy who was a bootlegger. He really likes this chick. He tries to create this fake identity for himself. It works for like a year or two. And then it turns out that nobody really liked him. The only guy who shows up is his funeral is the narrator. It's just a sad book about a guy who fully bought into this idea that I will come to this country and I will make myself the person that I want everyone to see me as. And there's these natural limits to that. And you could say that it's like a level of self-awareness because The Great Gatsby gets taught in almost every high school in the United States. Everybody knows what The Great Gatsby is. I don't feel like Fitzgerald is being particularly obscure or difficult about what he's trying to say with that book. it's just funny that it has that much. I mean, I guess like people relate to it, right? Like, because eventually you try to do that stuff. Maybe you become a butterfly, but most of the time you just get smacked down, and everybody's like, Jesus Christ, just get like Tucker Carlson or whatever. All those assholes on Fox News. It's like, the second I bought this bow tie, I'm an academic now, right? And they really believe it, and their audience is invested in believing it. Because if the audience doesn't believe that, then the audience has to come to terms with the fact that, like, buying a pickup truck does not make you a cowboy, right?
Wait, it doesn't? Incidentally, about reinventing yourself in other countries and other concepts, have you seen the movie Running Scared, 2005 movie? I think Paul Walker plays the main character. It's basically a criminal story, but it's told in the way of this dark urban fantasy tale. And the gist of it is that he plays, spoilers, an undercover cop who has to conceal a hot weapon. I don't know what you call him. The weapon that's been used in a shootout, and they shot a cop with this gun, so he had to conceal it. And he hid this gun temporarily in his house. The gun was then found by the kid of his neighbor. And his neighbor was a Russian immigrant. And he had this weird-ass backstory. He was obviously a violent drunk. And he was sitting there watching a television with some kind of John Wayne movie, I'm not sure. And this is a movie where he gets shot in the end. And he tells this story that back when he was in Russia, or in the USSR, I don't remember, before he emigrated, he used to watch this movie a lot in video saloons, the VHS video saloons where they show a movie to a smaller audience in a room. And some VHS are relatively well done, some are censored, some are edited very badly. So it's not really representative of the final movie all of the time, you know? And this was exactly the case. Like, he watched that movie, he used to watch this movie, and the ending was missing. So he didn't know that John Wayne was actually shot in the end. He thought that he would overcome these bad guys. This was his grand idea when he moved into the US, that he would finally see the way that John Wayne shoots the bad guys. When he came to the US, he realized that, oh shit, he's actually getting shot and dies in the end. What a terrible f***ing American dream. His American dream was completely shattered.
I think like foreign movies about like the American dream or some of the darkest shit I've ever watched, right? Like Leningrad Cowboys Go America. The point of that movie is not the big hair. The point of the movie is they go over to America and they hear like the streets are, like, oh, it's this great, crazy place. Every landscape shot in that movie looks like a bomb dropped on something and nobody picked it up, right? Like Stroshek by Herzog, right? The guy immigrates to America, he goes to the carnival, and I think he just shoots himself at the end or something like that. I can't, it's been a long time since I saw that movie, but metatextually, John Wayne did not grow up on a farm. John Wayne is from Brooklyn, New York.
Is from Brooklyn.
Like John Wayne's early life is closer to mine than that of an actual cowboy, right? And not that it's probably that close, but basically, John Wayne, maybe he is such a powerful symbol because, yeah, he's proof that you can literally put a hat on somebody in a handkerchief, and he can do that thing where it's like suddenly it looks like this guy's been riding horses his whole life. And, his best friend's like a cow or something, right?
We had the same thing with war movies. Like, war movies were extremely big. It was the industry within an industry, the war cinema. And some actors that were extremely famous and did some propaganda pictures during the Second World War, they never actually served in the army, but played some iconic characters. And this too, shows how little actually is required to depict a certain archetype in a culture. Like,
I feel like a lot of the appeal of movies subconsciously and in kind of like a dirty, I'm not fully comfortable with this kind of way, is this, it is a fantasy of self-reinvention through someone else's eyes. Like if I, cut my hair right, do my makeup right or whatever, people will think I'm a different person. And John Wayne, right, you just have... The camera is fairly expensive. If you want to go make your own movie about yourself, it's going to be fairly expensive. Now the whole tenor of the world is sort of like, if I can make a convincing enough picture of myself doing this thing, who cares what reality is, right?
I don't think you even have to make it convincing at this point.
Yeah. Like, I mean, nobody's looking at an Andrew Tate video thinking, like, this guy actually has any charisma, looks, or whatever, but he just says it enough times on video, and eventually these guys who can't believe this thing about themselves, they're like, well, if Andrew Tate could do it, and of course, Andrew Tate's just a racist. His pickup artist manual is like, get the chloroform, put the bag over your head or whatever, like.
The way I see it is the key is just to get the right audience. Cast the widest net possible. Like, if you have an access to the larger audience, you're going to be successful, whatever. Like, whatever you're trying to deliver to people, whatever you're trying to convey, whatever message. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, people will find a way to interpret you in their positively for themselves. Like,
oh, so, yeah. It's like transferred narcissism, I would almost call it.
Like, at what point John Wayne, from this convincing cowboy guy, became this weirdo racist caricature of Genghis Khan?
Right. Like,
where's the cutoff line? Like, where's the barrier here?
John Wayne was never a particular, like, every account that I've ever heard of John Wayne or like interview that I've read, he's kind of an idiot. He's a savant. Ford understood, like, I'm sure Ford got the dailies back on him in that Stagecoach, and he's like, all right, yeah, this is my vessel that I talk about this stuff through. Because Ford was pretty far to the left relative. I mean, the depiction of Native Americans in Stagecoach obviously is not very sympathetic, but he does go back to the subject and kind of try to write it a little bit in The Searchers. John Wayne, maybe there's like somebody who's an expert on John Wayne who wants to come on here and explain a bit more of this to me. But the sense I get with John Wayne is basically Stagecoach comes out. Everybody thinks he's the toughest, manliest cowboy that ever lived because he was in this movie. And he starts thinking he was the toughest, manliest cowboy that ever lived. Like Kid Rock.
So many people actually believe what they're said in regards to their characters. Like, they start to accept that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of country music culture in the United States is very rich people trying to pretend that they're white trash because they think that there's this authenticity that they can never access, right? It's sort of like suburban kids trying to play black.
If you judge by like 5 or 10 minutes that you managed to watch of the 1986 version of Stagecoach, would you say that these guys actually sort of took cowboy thing, the Highwaymen thing, too seriously?
Well, the sense that I got was like clearly all of these guys would have watched Stagecoach at some point when they were young and impressionable. They probably watched a lot of John Wayne movies when they were a kid. Or kids, and it kind of just looked like like Adam Sandler will make those movies where it's just an excuse for him to hang out with his friends somewhere.
I thought of do you remember Nostalgia Critic and his anniversary movies of that guy with the glasses? This was the Highwayman Kikassia.
Right, yes. Chris Kристофферсon's The Wall.
Yeah, it's like those internet celebrities. I'm doing like quote unquote thing here, who just do some sort of weird collab videos. This is the vibe I got. Like, but from 1986.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's like the fact that it was a TV movie.
Yeah,
I think says everything because it's just like, okay, we have the novelty of these four men in the same movie.
Let's film them.
We expect nothing else out of this. Like, I don't think anybody was going into making that movie thinking like, oh, this is going to make these guys the next Rat Pack or whatever, like.
The big blockbuster movie of the 1986. Stagecoach.
Yeah. Ocean's 11, but with cow shit.
Yeah, especially considering that the guy who directed it, Ted Post, he was TV director all the way. Like, probably the biggest movie that he made that I could think of, like I could find on his IMDb filmography was, I think it was one of the Dirty Harry movies, like Magnum Force, I think it was. So one of the Dirty Harry movies.
Not even the first one, yeah.
No, I think Dirty Harry was the first Dirty Harry movie.
I'm pretty sure, yeah, that sounds...
What?
I mostly know Dirty Harry is a series of children's books I was given as a child about a dog that refuses to bathe.
Are you sure it was a series of children's books?
Maybe they were trying to send me a message, but it was about this dog, and it was like, Harry wants to be dirty, and there's just like pigpen flies coming off of him the whole book. Finally, they hose down the dog, and it's like, everyone will love you if you clean yourself, you know, and
I have a hose in one of my hands, and you gotta ask yourself a question. Do you feel yourself dirty, punk?
I will find this book. I swear to God, there was a series of them about this hygiene challenged dog.
Okay, so what's better, books about hygiene challenged dog or Stagecoach 1986?
Well, I remember the book about the dog 30 years later. I don't know that I'm going to remember the 86 Stagecoach 30 years from now.
Or its existence in general.
Right. And I didn't even touch the 66 one.
Oh, yeah. We neither. We also came to that conclusion that a 1986 version was wildly unnecessary. This was basically... We saw it as a way for those guys to collab on a video, you know?
Right.
Sort of a fun challenge for the weekend. Like, could we make a movie all together? Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, because like none of those people think they're gonna be like Willie Nelson has been working for how long at that point? I mean, because he started working
60?
in Nashville when he was like 15 or something like that. Like, you know that Patsy Cline song "Crazy."
Mm-hmm.
Willie Nelson wrote that. He wrote a ton of country hits before anybody knew who the Willie Nelson was. He doesn't, you know, he's not going in this TV movie, I think, thinking like, I'm going to be a famous actor. That's what I really wanted to be. All this music stuff was horse shit to get me here, you know, like,
Yeah.
It's a fun goof.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny Cash isn't suddenly going to become, he's not sending headshots with glitter bombs in them all over Hollywood after this movie, you know.
It's okay for what it was, I suppose. And it's kind of interesting that they had at least some budget to hire a director and an editor and, you know, to produce the thing altogether. That's kind of the thing I got out of it.
Well, I kind of got the sense it's a made-for-TV movie. By 86, there is a home video market. Right, so it's like making a TV movie is a very different thing at that point than it would have been even like 8 years earlier. And weirdly enough, like the early TV made-for-TV movies, like some of those like ABC Movie of the Week things, are actually really good, but they never got released because they're before this thing.
Before VHS?
Yeah, like before VHS, before even like CED video disc, right? Like it's Off the Minnesota Strip, great movie. There's this one that had Andy Griffith as an alcoholic and Keanu Reeves as like his son. That was actually pretty good. And by the time that like 86 rolls around, you know, you get the four country guys. Very few people would have paid the money to go into a movie theater to see this. But if it's like, yeah, all right, it's Monday night. What the hell am I doing? Let's watch Johnny Cash play dress up for a little bit.
Yeah, sure,
right?
why
like
not?
That's an appealing pitch to people, right? People love variety shows 10 years ago. Like Johnny Cash had a fucking variety show just like Cher did in the 70s. And maybe not exactly like Cher did, but like seeing stars was more of a big draw than it is now. You know, obviously now we have social media. Those four guys make a movie together. It's just like, this is going to be god awful, and I already have plenty of pictures of them that I can access at my fingertips whenever I want to.
I wouldn't call it celebrity driven, but clearly these guys driven. Like if you want to watch these guys doing this, sure, why not? I think the overall like thought was, sure, why not?
Well, the thing I found interesting about the part of it I did finish was that if you want to see everything that makes John Ford important as a director, watch the first 10 minutes of that, then watch the first 10 minutes of like the 38 Stagecoach.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see that, like, okay, the reaction shot thing I was talking about, whoever directed the 86 one does not understand that shit at all.
Mm.
What does the inside of a building feel like? Doesn't care. What, what is the pacing? The music in the 86 one, because like the music, at least in the 38 one, there's not somebody singing over it, and I don't get the feeling of like they are trying to sell me a soundtrack record to this, right? Like,
you didn't like Willie Nelson's Stagecoach, Stagecoach.
Like as a song, I don't mind it. As like a thing in a movie, it seems kind of
quaint, weird.
Weird. Well, it just seems like they're trying to sell me a soundtrack, right? Like one of these movies came out before Easy Rider, and one of these movies very obviously came out after Easy Rider.
Mm-hmm.
Right, with the whole like pop song soundtrack. Oh, we can sell the soundtrack as a collection of pop songs, that kind of thing. And then every movie after that, it's like, you gave the drunk guy the iPod to play DJ at your house party or whatever on top of whatever the movie is. Sometimes they do a good job with that, but it's very rare.
So what you're saying is this is a prototype of early 2000s comedies, which had like a wide variety of licensed songs.
Comedies, action movies. I think the worst offender in that regard that I remember is the Ben Affleck Daredevil.
Oh, I love that movie.
Oh my God. I saw that in the theater. I was probably 12. I was the biggest fucking comic dork you've ever seen. Hated it. I hated it. Every scene has to begin with this fucking new metal garbage.
What? You didn't like the scene of, what's her name? Jennifer Garner training montage with Evanescence soundtrack?
Like, some of those early ones where they'd have like one person do the music, and it's like, it's okay. Like The Graduate, I don't mind the Simon and Garfunkel stuff. Like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the Leonard Cohen stuff works just fine. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when it gets to like the All-Star soundtrack era, like...
I wouldn't say the Stagecoach 1986 would sell anything beyond this song. Maybe the idea was to remind that, yeah, I'm Willie Nelson and I can sing still. Maybe kind of buy a couple of my albums, yo.
Yeah, it was like their version of Backstreet Boys, Backstreet's Back. Like, we still exist, we're still living, come buy our records. Remember that Willie Nelson guy? Well, he's not dead yet and he wants more of your money.
Which is fitting because that's exactly the title of our podcast, Not Yet Willie. Right. And this was the bonus episode of our podcast, which is entirely in English. And I'm not sure if anyone is going to even listen to the first 5 minutes of it.
This is the first episode of We're Not Dead Yet. Please give us money.
Oh, yeah, sure. Please send us all the monies to... And that's the part where I should cut right off into the outro.
Yep, we...
thanks, Dan.
If you meet me at the bus station, I will provide the brown paper bag. I'm that good.
Well, if you ever visit the what's the address people can find you at, Dan?
Oh, I'm at Silver Factory Books and Records. If you want to hear me shit on more things that you like, ruin American popular culture for you, or you can just give me money for CDs and video games. Either way, all of it happens. It's a happening place.
Mm-hmm.
Ballston Spa, New York. Sunny, scenic, legendary Ballston Spa.
Cool. Also, don't forget to check their podcast, Dan and Ron's Anomaly podcast, which is also quite fun. Let's put it this way.
Happy Halloween.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Halloween. Yeah. Very fitting conclusion. Bye.